What's good, Tsla family? It's Ray J back with another video, and this one I want to break down what's going on with the overall market, what you should be watching for moving forward. I'm also going to talk about Tesla stocks, SPY, Nvidia, the QQQ, and a couple of tickers out there, and break down some very important news that just came out for Tesla, talk about what the technicals are telling us, and what's going on for this week. But before I break things down with all this information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things before starting. I am firstly not a financial planner, so make sure you take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends in just 3 days, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. All right, looking at Tesla, we've seen Tesla being quite range bound over the last couple of trading days, if not the last like 7 to 8 days. It's just been going back and forth and back and forth. But the question is, can Tesla try to get this break to the upside above the 50 EMA, or will Tesla likely get this rejection? So we're going to be talking about this in just a couple of minutes. Let's first talk about the overall market. So just as a reminder, we have another crazy earnings week for this week. We have SoFi announcing earnings in the morning alongside a couple of banks and some other biotech companies. Then for after the market closes, we have a couple of others like Zoom Info, and nothing too crazy for Monday earnings. But then starting between Tuesday through Thursday, it's going to become crazier as we have Uber and Pfizer, not to mention AMD, all on Tuesday. Then for Wednesday, we have CVS, PayPal, Shopify, and a few others, which are going to be more significant, especially like Unity for the other like retail investors that are interested in that. And then for Thursday, it's going to be a crazy day as we have big tech earnings coming out. We have Amazon, we have Apple, we have Coinbase, and the list goes on. Thursday is going to be a crazy day, so make sure you're ready for this. And we have some very, very big stuff coming out. Now, for Monday in particular, earnings are not going to be that crazy in the morning. We could see SoFi have somewhat of an effect on different sectors, but it's not going to be that crazy in my opinion. What could affect the market a little bit more is going to be the Chicago PMI report coming out at 9:45 a.m. Eastern time, so that's New York time. 15 minutes after the market opens. This could cause a little bit more volatility, so make sure you're prepared for that just to be safe. But that's basically it. There's nothing too crazy going on for Monday. Now, there's some talk for Tesla that's coming out about how they're trying to close a deal in Connecticut right now, but the problem is there are other individuals out there coming out and saying that Tesla's evading the law, and it's making things a lot more difficult for them. Tesla wants to basically build a showroom over there and start selling cars in a shop, but it's becoming a little bit more difficult for them. Now, this could go either way depending on the legalistic aspect of it, and Tesla's going to continue to fight and try to make like more business going over there. For now, this hasn't been that positive for them as this is leading to more hurdles, but I don't think this news is that crazy. Even though it's making all these headlines, I don't think it's that significant for Tesla stock. I don't think it's going to affect it that much. And we'll see what happens tomorrow morning with the news. The news has been driving Tesla like crazy for the last couple of days. Now, the price-price ratio for Tesla has dropped a little bit, which is showing a little bit of weakness for the stock, but it did improve its price action on Friday after getting some very bullish news involving some talks involving another Indian gigafactory. Now, that was some very, very good stuff, but we're going to have to wait and see what happens over the next few days in terms of the news, and that's going to have a bigger effect on Tesla too. Now, Morgan Stanley is saying that they have an equal weight rating on Tesla, but UBS did downgrade Tesla from a buy to neutral. So they did change their views on Tesla, which did affect it, especially on the 24th. But for now, we will be paying attention to any analysts for tomorrow morning to see if they say anything new. Now, Mondays tend to be good days for Tesla 53% of the time. So most of the time on Mondays, we tend to be green. And we tend to be a little bit weaker in July than June. I think that is a good way to describe Tesla so far. But things could change moving forward depending on big tech earnings and some other pieces of news. And to add on to this, don't forget that Tesla, in terms of its seasonality, this was adjusted recently. So during the second hour, we tend to see more volatility. During the fourth and fifth hours, we tend to see a lot more volatility for Tesla. And we tend to see more green during those hours. This was adjusted for the previous week. So now watch Tesla in particular during the second, during the fourth and fifth hours. We tend to be more green during those times. Now moving forward, there was something else that's interesting. The short interest is continuing to decline on Tesla, which is a good sign for it. So this does give the bulls a bit of an edge because once again, Tesla is seeing less short volume relative to before, and the volume is still pretty decent on Tesla, 111 million as we're seeing some interest coming out. And on top of that, I want to mention that the short volume percentage relative to price is going down, which is pretty good for Tesla. When this thing runs to the upside or tries to improve its price action, we tend to see this drop, and that is starting to happen right now, which could be a little bit more bullish for the stock. Now, to add on to this, when it comes to their listings, I just want to mention that the Model X listings are starting to go up like crazy right now. So it's not a very good sign for Tesla. But besides that, the Model S, the Model 3, and the Model Y remain in favor. They're continuing to be bought up quite nicely and maintain these lower values, which is pretty good for Tesla, as there's still very good demand for the Model 3 and these other models. But I want to see the Model X listings start to drop. We saw this big increase in them. They're well over like 1,000 right now. Let's hope we get more sales for them for the next like deliveries report to be a lot better. And we will continue to monitor this and see how it's looking moving forward. But for now, let's talk about Tesla. How is this looking from a technical standpoint? So for the 4-hour time frame, right? When you look at the charts, it's stuck between the 50 EMA. This yellow line is the 50 EMA right here. And then we have our 200 EMA, which is going to be the 200 or the red line down here, basically. And we've been stuck going back and forth between this for quite a while. Now, if you want to turn bullish on Tesla, you want to see it break above this yellow line, you want to break the 50 EMA. If you break this, we're going to test the next major resistance, which is going to be around 274. And if that breaks, if we get above 274, it's going to go flying quite easily to 280. This is where we have this imbalance up here. This is going to act as a magnet for Tesla if we get above those two levels. So watch your 50 EMA very, very carefully on the 4-hour time frame and keep the extended hours on if you are interested. Now, if we get a rejection off this 50 EMA, right, the bears are going to argue that, hey, that's going to happen. There's bad news and this and that. If we get bad news tomorrow and we get a big rejection, we're going to likely see Tesla retest this like 262 area. And if that fails us, like I said before, we have this unfilled gap all the way down to like this 256 area. Now, that is a little suspicious, and I'd be very careful when looking at it. So please, please, please be very, very careful for all investors out there and do what you have to do. What do I think is more likely to happen? And honestly, guys, it's very hard to predict Tesla right now because we're going through a very strange phase. We're not being as impacted by like some earnings or some like major catalyst or any like crazy pieces of news. What's happening is one day we have bullish news, Tesla pumps. The next day, bearish news, it drops. Like it got these downgrades on these days and it dropped. Next day, it had neutral news, not much happened. Next day, it gapped up on good news, then it just dumped. Next day, it pumped on good news. So it's just, the news is just like dictating this thing back and forth, making it hard to predict based off technicals. That sometimes happens during these phases, but it's not always like that. But from a technical standpoint, you could argue that Tesla has like a double bottom like formation. This thing's getting ready to like break to the upside. That is a real possibility, but you want to watch for confirmation. Now, from a technical standpoint, it looks a little bit more bullish. It looks like it's more probable Tesla's going to try to break 268 at this point. Maybe gap down, like retrace a little bit to like 262 or so, then try to bounce and then try to continue to break to the upside, especially because there's a chance the market could try to like pump a little bit near the middle of the week because of Apple's earnings. And then we will see if Tesla can maintain these levels and try to continue to hold. So we're going to be watching 268 if this could break. My gut tells me it's going to try to break out into the 270s, but just to be safe, I don't want to like say this in a very confident manner. There's some instances where I'm more confident on Tesla. So for example, like when it pumped to 300, I was very confident we're going to get that, and that is what happened. But this time around, the reason why I'm lacking some confidence is because the news is just all over the place. One day there's great news that pumps Tesla. Next day, bad news comes out and it just dumps Tesla. It's been in that trend. And we also have this gap down here. So just be very, very careful to see if we could break this 50 EMA. I'm guessing, and I'm really hoping that this, maintains the double bottom formation and as the odds do favor upside. I'm hoping we do get this break to the upside. We try to see Tesla break all the way to around 274. I think the odds are favoring that in terms of TA, but just to be safe, we're going to be watching resistance and watch for confirmation. So I think the odds favor a gap down. Maybe it gaps down a little bit, then it tries to bounce after that and tries pushing as we get some good volume. I'm hoping we get a break to the upside, but I'm always going to be open-minded depending on the news. So make sure before the market opens, if you're trading Tesla, you watch the news. Is the news positive or negative for the day? And that's going to dictate the way it goes. That's what's been happening for the past 8 days. Make sure you are prepared. In terms of SPY, this thing has been trading sideways for quite a while. It's been kind of range bound for many, many days in a row, stuck between like the four. It was basically stuck near 454. There were some instances where it came a little bit lower, but 454 or so has been like our decent support as of recent. And then we have resistance very close to like 458 area. It's been going back and forth and back and forth. I think there's a good chance we're going to see this thing make an attempt to try to break 458. Maybe it goes a little higher for 460 or so, but then it fails and makes its way right back down, comes back down to like 456 or so, and it continues to trade sideways. That's what I'm seeing for most stocks out there. And I think the market's going to do this for a little bit of time because these earnings are going to be a little capricious. They're going to be a little bit maybe not as impactful, not as like weighted into like price action compared to like the later days of the week. So the beginning of the week could be a little bit boring, but things are going to go crazy as we approach Wednesday and Thursday, especially with like PayPal's earnings and Apple's. Those are going to be very, very big. Also, AMD's is going to be pretty big too. That's going to affect stocks like Nvidia. So make sure you're ready and prepared for that just to be safe. Now, to add on to this, for the triple Q, this is looking kind of mixed and also a little bit more bullish at the same time. So why does it look a little bit more bullish? Well, we have a nice accumulation structure that is developed right over here. But the reason why I'm kind of mixed is because we have this resistance right here, which we got rejected off of many times. So there's a chance it could gap down, slow down in the morning, retest like 382 or so, and then try to get a breakout after that. And if it manages to break above 385, maybe Apple starts pumping a bit, approaching its earnings. If that happens, I'm going to be watching it break 385. If that breaks, 388 is going to come. If that breaks, there's 390. I think the odds favor that from a technical analysis standpoint, but it may retrace a little bit first. And then you're going to be watching 382, 380, and then 378 as our three major supports. That's also shown on the 5, the 20, and the 50 EMAs. Watch these as supports, these zones very carefully. It may retrace a little bit first and try to get a bounce, but from a technical analysis standpoint, it looks more bullish. It looks like the market may try to make an attempt to the upside. Maybe there's some excitement involving like Amazon and Apple that pump the markets. That could happen like in the middle of the week, and we could see this thing retest 385. It looks like it's going to try to break above that and retest like 388 first. Now, to add on to this, when it comes to like Apple's holding up pretty decently. It's actually starting to uptrend very nicely. So we're going to be watching, could this thing try to get above this 197.2 resistance? The thing about Apple that isn't that great, though, that I'm not really liking when it comes to trading is the fact that a lot of these overall technical levels are very tight on it. Like, for example, it has resistance at like 194, 194.5, 194.75. You know what I'm saying? It's like really, really tight. And that's something that's not that great about it, but it still has potential to try to break out, and then earnings will determine which way it goes. Now, I think there's a good chance it's going to retest 197.5, then make its way up to about 198 if that breaks. And it could, if it breaks 198, it's going to likely try to make its way up to 200 from that point on. I think there's a good chance Apple's going to try that, once again, breaking another all-time high. And it's going to likely, in my opinion, try to pump approaching its earnings. There's going to be some excitement, lots of hype, as expectations tend to be very high. Now, if that's the case, that could help the market pump in the middle of the week, but be careful because with earnings, you never know what's going to happen. It could turn south very fast if guidance is not the best. So always be prepared and always be open-minded and watch what the chart tells you. I also want to call out NEO. I made a video about NEO not too long ago, just yesterday, and I mentioned to you all the numbers are looking really good for their deliveries. They should be coming out on either August 1st or August 2nd for here in the USA time. One of those days it should be coming out. That's going to be a little bit later in China. And when these numbers come out, they're going to most likely break an all-time high in their monthly deliveries. There's going to be a big increase month over month, and this is going to make a lot of headlines, and lots of investors are going to jump. This is why it's been pumping. It's already been pumping quite nicely. I'm going to be looking for either it to retrace a little bit first because it is a little overbought, and then it just continues going, or it might just keep going from here and not even retrace that much. If it breaks out, you're going to be watching 15.25, 16, 16.8, and then the 17 to 17.5 as resistances. Those are resistances. It could make its way all the way up into the 15s very soon. It looks more bullish than bearish. But just be aware that there are some instances where it like cools off a tiny bit, then just continues popping. It could cool off a little bit, then pop more, or it might just keep going from here. It looks more bullish though, holding up very nicely. For Nvidia, I called out Nvidia, and I mentioned to you all it looks bullish as well. It could retrace just a little bit first. Like I said before in my video, it might retrace a little bit to like 465, 462.5 or something like that. Then we're going to be watching for a nice bounce after that. And I think that it's forming a nice accumulation right here. Nice inverse head and shoulders. And you have a target of about this 480 area, 478 to 480. And we're actually not that close to it. We're actually quite a distance away. So I think it's going to retrace a little bit and try to make its way up from a technical analysis standpoint. If it gets above 470 or so, if it's like holding above that nicely, it is most likely going to make its way up from 478 to 480. That could be a very, very good play if it does hold it nicely and technicals remain bullish during that time frame. If it breaks below 462, around that support very close to our 20 EMA, then you're going to be watching it to retest like 456 or so. Right about here, 456, and if that fails, then we have like 451-ish, like around there as our next support. I don't think it's going to retrace that hard. I think it could retrace a little bit, but I think it's going to try to bounce and push up to about this 478 to 480 area. Don't forget AMD has earnings. That's going to be impactful for it. For Microsoft, this thing may be getting set for a bounce. Could we be forming kind of like an inverse head and shoulder structure? If so, we're going to be watching this thing trying to make its way up to about 344, reject off that, create a little sideways here to be forming its right shoulder. And as long as it holds above around like 332 or so, like around that area, as long as it holds above that, it could make its way up to form and complete this imbalance fill all the way up to about this like 351 area. And I think there's a good chance it's going to play out, but just to be safe, we have to watch for confirmation and watch these levels carefully. There is this gap down here. If it breaks below 330, 332-ish around there, it's going to come all the way down to like 330, if not 329, and that could invalidate this. So just be very careful with Microsoft. It looks to me like it's going to just trade a little sideways, pump a little bit, and then trade sideways, and eventually try to break out as of right now. For AMD, we might see this thing pump approaching its earnings. From a technical standpoint, this is what it's looking like. It's forming another accumulation, just like the QQQ, and we're going to be watching these imbalances up here. We're going to be watching, could it make its way up to about 115? If it manages to do that, there's a chance it's going to pump all the way up to about 118 again. And we also have another imbalance. I remember I called this out not too long ago. We have these imbalances way back here, which were formed back in June around this 118 area, and then another one all the way up to about this like 125 area. So if it gets a nice pump, after earnings, we're going to be watching levels all the way up there. But for now, I think there's a chance it's going to try to hold up and may even try to pump a little bit approaching its earnings. So we're going to be watching, can it make its way up to about 115, break that, then we have 118, and then after that we have like 120. If it breaks down, which I'm not really counting on it to drop that hard, we could be watching 110, 109, and 107. I think it could retrace a little bit in the morning, retest like 111 right about here, the support that we had around 111.67, then try to bounce after that. I think it's going to test 115 soon and eventually try to break out. It has a nice setup that's forming, so we're going to be watching that carefully. For the VIX, this thing was still down. I mean, it's just all over the place, not really getting a strong break. Like it looked like it wanted to before, but it just failed. So it's continuing to trade sideways, not really giving us a clear direction, not looking that great. Now for the SQQQ, I just want to mention that when we watch this, we're going to be watching to see if this thing could get a nice bounce. It might bounce a little bit like I mentioned, the QQQ could retrace a little bit before it potentially bouncing. So we do have a potential play on the SQQQ. We could get a bounce around here, a small little like pump to the upside before it comes right back down. And then we're going to be watching to see what happens with Apple's earnings. So make sure you're very careful with this play. Apple and the whole market could affect whether or not this plays out. So don't, risk too much on it. It's just worth noting. For the dollar, not the dollar, sorry, Coinbase, we're going to be watching to see how it reacts to this previous support, which is very close to where this 91.5 area happens to be. So we're going to be watching that very carefully to see how it reacts to it, if it does get a bounce off there or not. So be very careful. In my opinion, from a technical standpoint, this is looking not the best. I would say it looks like it may get a little bounce, a retest of like 100, then a rejection, and downtrend just a little bit on the smaller time frames. It could get a retest of 95 and then make its way down after getting that like gap up all the way down to like 90 or so. But when you zoom out of the much larger trend, the much bigger time frame is still looking more bullish, even though yes, it could retrace in the smaller time frames. On the bigger time frames, there could be a big uptrend coming. If you just look at the chart on the weekly, still looks quite nice. Last but not least, for Amazon and Meta, Amazon, it might actually start pumping a little bit approaching its earnings. The weekly is still quite decent. The 30-minute time frame is still looking quite nice for Amazon, and we're going to be watching, can this thing hold these levels? We formed a potential inverse head and shoulder structure here. If it manages to break above these levels, we're going to be watching this imbalance around 135 or so. If we can manage to break above 134, for now it looks like it could be on its way up there, and it may actually uptrend approaching its earnings, but then we'll see what happens after that. As for Meta, we got a decent looking bounce. Earnings were quite good for them with strong guidance, and we saw this thing pump very nicely. But looking at the structure, in my opinion, if it continues to break above 325, you're going to be watching 330. Then we have 330, 332.5, then 335 above those two levels. We're going to be watching those very carefully on Meta. I think there's a good chance that it may retrace a little bit, retest like 322 to 320, then just try to continue going. And we're going to be watching around 330 just to be safe. But anyways, guys, that's what I have for this video. I want to keep this one very simple. Make sure you watch for confirmation on Tesla and for many of these different stocks. Yes, there's a chance that Tesla could break out, but make sure we have to watch for that 50 EMA just for confirmation. I want to mention that my confidence on predicting Tesla is a little bit lower right now than before because it's so dictated by the news that comes out before the market opens or even on an intraday basis. And the news has been all over the place. One day it's pumping Tesla, the next day it causes it to drop, next day it pumps it, next day it drops, next day it pumps it. It's just all over the place. So make sure that you're watching the news and you're listening to what's being said very carefully and do what you have to do. Watch your TA very carefully, watch for confirmations, and let the charts tell you what to do. Do not chase, hunt for opportunities. And remember, the chart is what's going to make everything clear. All right, guys, so thank you for listening. Have a good one. Tesla on the market to the moon as the long term is still incredibly bright. And peace out.